Well, let's go ahead and do introductions since we have time and others of you have joined us at the table. I'm Yvonne Curtis, Superintendent from Forest Grove School District and Chair of Best Practices and on OEIB. Hilda?
David Reeves, American Federation of Teachers, Oregon, and OEIB.
Scott Fletcher, Dean of the Graduate School at Lewis and Clark, and actually I'm here as the President of the Oregon Association of Colleges for Teacher Education.
Serena Stoudemire-Wesley, Early Transitions, Equity and Community Director for OEIB.
Dana Hepper, I'm the Early Learning Director at the Children's Institute.
Excuse me. Emma Campbell, Educational Policy Improvement Center.
Boy, I feel very out of my depth. I'm Tiff Mumal, and I'm the mother of a dyslexic child.
Welcome.
Okay. Lisa Metz, Oregon University System. I'm actually sitting in for Karen Marinchal today.
Thank you. Great.
Kim Williams with North Central ESD Early Education and Early Learning Council.
And Hilda Rosselli, Director for College and Career Readiness with the OEIB, and I staff and support Chair Curtis. And the rest of the committee.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
And Seth supports all of us as well.
Yes.
So we're just waiting for Mark to join us and then we'll have a quorum. For those of you who have not joined us before, typically we've had our meetings pretty chock full of presentations, and today we're a little off cycle in terms of meeting on the same day as OEIB, and we have a little bit, I think, more relaxed time. We have a couple of presentations. I know Scott and Serena will be speaking to us directly, but we have some time for the committee to discuss some of the things we're going to move forward to OEIB. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation. Mark, was that you joining us?
It is I. How are we doing?
Yay, now we have a quorum. We'll get started, okay?
Sounds good.
I'll go ahead and call us to order. It's 10:06. Welcome, everybody. Kay won't be with us, but Mark is here for the first hour, and I don't know that we need to call roll because we've already done introductions. And we know Kay won't be with us, and we're not sure about Lynn, so we'll look for her to maybe join us. So the first thing is I need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda. Any discussion? All right. Anybody opposed to approving the agenda? Okay, we'll move that forward. Now I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Any discussion? I'll just update one thing from the minutes. The College and Career Readiness definition was approved at our last meeting, and it will be on the agenda for the joint HEC and OEIB meeting in March. So that's just an information piece. All right. All those in favor of approving the agenda?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So we've approved, I'm sorry, the minutes. That was the minutes. Vote for the minutes. Okay, we'll move those forward. And Scott Fletcher is here, as he said, he's the Dean from the Lewis and Clark College Graduate School of Education, President of Oregon Association of College for Teacher Education. At the last meeting, we discussed the audit recommendation that OEIB identified as a state entity such as OUS and TSPC to gather, analyze, and report on the effectiveness of graduates to provide performance indicators for Oregon's public teaching colleges. We've actually had this discussion kind of going on since we convened earlier in the fall. Scott will be updating us on the conversation involving the educator preparation programs and TSPC on an institutional profile that might serve this purpose. So we'll turn it over to you, Scott.
Great, thank you. So I really do want to describe this as an update as opposed to a presentation because one of the first things I'll say is this is at a fairly early stage, it being the document that I think was distributed to the committee says institutional profile at the top. And the reason it's preliminary is because it has really been generated out of a discussion from a sort of small group. Hilda and I participated with the leadership of TSPC to sort of get a draft up and rolling. It hasn't been kind of formally vetted by the commission. It hasn't been formally vetted by the membership of OACTE. So it's very much something in progress, and I want everybody to understand it as in its preliminary nature. The sort of story can become disattached from this kind of document, can go forward as if it exists as something that's been passed or voted on or we've reached consensus about. And that's not the case. So caveats to begin with. The second thing I want to say by way of introduction is how this document sort of fits midway in the stream of a variety of policy initiatives underway. Part of that context is the Secretary of State Auditor's report, which called on TSPC in particular and the profession of education preparation in general, educator preparation in general, to provide the public with more information about programs and more specifically performance data. So one little piece of that policy stream is obviously from that report. It's probably the place kind of where the rubber met the road with respect to TSPC's interest in moving this forward. Even prior to that time, however, TSPC has been interested, and by the way, I'm sort of obviously speaking as a dean and from the OACT perspective now, not from their perspective. TSPC has for some time, I think, been interested in how the many kinds of data and information that they collect during the program approval process might be made more public or might be represented in a way that gives more people access to it. So that kind of started way before the auditor's report. So there's a second sort of bit of policy momentum that applies to this document. A third is what's happening nationally with respect to accreditation. So I'm not sure the extent to which CAPE, CAEP standards, that's the former two national accreditors coming together into a single organization, NCAPE and TIAC. They are, for some of the same reasons, sort of more public access to descriptive information as well as performance data. They are part of that policy momentum nationally. So CAPE now is actually well on the way to mandating, which they can for the organizations that seek national accreditation from them, an annual report. So at some point in this process, we'll compare the 2 or 3 different kinds of annual reports that are going to be required for teacher preparation programs, and this will ultimately look like one of them. So at some point there'll be a discussion about whether to do several, whether to integrate them, but there will be cross-cutting sort of governance structures, national accreditation, state program approval, and then whatever the profession contributes to that conversation. So all that by way of background, but I think an important piece, not only explaining how we got here, but also explaining the kind of criteria or factors that will be used to determine the adequacy of any such proposal, this being one example. So the document that I've distributed, or get to distribute, tries to do some things that go beyond the simple list of data presented. I can't say frequently or strongly enough that the primary purpose for this kind of reporting is program improvement. Unfortunately, this kind of work will inevitably be sort of dumped into an accountability bucket, and there will be a variety of audiences who are moved, many times for very good reasons, to kind of collect this data, make comparisons, and publish results of dubious methodological credibility. So the idea here is that this kind of report represents a very long tradition in Oregon of teacher preparation programs using very institution-specific, difficult to collect, and carefully analyze data to improve their programs. That's the first thing to say, is this is a statement by the profession of its own responsibility for program improvement. The sort of second big goal of doing this is to share that data with people who are colleagues in one way or another, both the professional community, obviously, that's fairly close at hand, but also the general public, who are, of course, consumers of their own kind. Whether as students, parents of teachers who were taught by teacher preparation program graduates or interns. You'd be hard-pressed not to find someone who was not connected, as you well know, with education in some way, and therefore with educator preparation. So the idea is to strengthen the profession, to communicate across stakeholders, and to raise the profile of the work that's being done. So you'll hear a lot, not just in this, and I'm sure in this case, but I'm sure you have in other conversations, about the need to support the professionalism of teachers and all educators. And this is a part of that. So again, not a caveat, but I'd say a strong statement of mission about what this kind of work is. It's not defensive. It's not because it's required for some sort of rating or ranking. This is part of the evidence-based practice that we use in teacher preparation to assess our own work and to improve it over time. So you'll see.
Can I just say that
Yes.
I think that's a really, I guess if I use the word noble, purpose, and I think it's really important. I've just recently heard a few people from the business sector saying we've got to do something to elevate the profession of educators. Right. And I think it's a really important point you make, that this is from the profession of educators to strengthen our own profession. So I just hope that we continue to call out the importance of that, because I think we're all in the accountability movement. We know it can be used in different ways, but I think in everything we do, and in this state we have the opportunity to do that now as we're reinventing the system, is to call out, this is what the experts who are expert in that field are saying we need to be about in any of the accountability requirements, because we know there's tons of them for all of us. So Thank you for pointing that out. I think it's really important.
I appreciate your recognition of it and working forward on it together. So the easy part is to sort of look at the list and see what's on it. So you'll see it's grouped into 3 fairly straightforward categories: institutional information, program characteristics, and then the sort of most complex piece, in some ways, where the spotlight will go, performance data. So, again, consistent with the idea that this is a sort of statement by professionals in the field, the idea here is that institutions themselves would be required, probably, because it will come through the program approval process ultimately, I think, to have this kind of data on the institutional website. And the reason, again, I say that is because it's not in its current form, and in our discussions with TSVC so far, again, very preliminary, and not with the approval or reflection of the whole commission. The idea is not to sort of collect and publish this on a centralized website, right? In some sort of graphic comparison, again, that might lead people to draw conclusions that can't be reasonably drawn from the data. So the idea is institutions would provide this data, would be required to provide it in its final form. I think we should have on the table. And the goal or goals being, again, program improvement and communication. So those are the sort of criteria we would use for what belongs there. So you'll see it sort of moves from kind of descriptive information that might help people better understand a particular institution's approach to educator preparation, the kind of people they have working for them, the kind of schools they work with, the kind of partnerships they have, and then the last category of performance data, generally speaking, standardized, quantifiable performance data.
Great. You ready for questions?
I am. I think that would be best.
Okay. Questions from committee members? David, do you have anything?
No, I think that's good what you said. I remember the presentation about CAPE and the new standards, including using the tests of the students that the educators are teaching. I think that's down here under tests. I think that's supposed to be pass rates.
That's
So
those are the tests that our teacher candidates take,
Oh, okay.
as opposed to
Okay.
their students. That's required by federal Title II reporting.
So is that in here too, the test of the students in the schools? That was talked about with the CAPE.
Right.
I believe it was the new CAPE standards.
It's not.
Okay.
And if you,
I wasn't in support of those anyway.
well,
so
and even, I mean,
I
to
think
be
it's a
honest-
very, very tenuous connection between that and the education somebody received at a teacher education program.
Right.
David, are you referring to the students that those student teachers might be teaching? Is that what you're referring
Yes.
to?
Right, the value-added measures. And CAPE does have, that's a standalone standard among the 5 new CAPE standards. But even CAPE is taking, I mean, I'm not entirely in agreement with their sort of approach to this for some of the same reasons you've described, but even CAPE is taking a kind of, we know we can't quite do it yet approach, where you are looking at an aspirational kind of system. So even talking about it as a common characteristic of this kind of reporting, there's no one in Oregon suggesting that that can be done or that it would be helpful.
It's probably a good idea for us to figure out the teachers most directly, figure out that system first, because we're just now
If that's
trying that
even
one.
possible.
Yeah,
In the first
exactly.
place.
I think just that you have completers and test results from the teachers in the program who
Right.
we're looking at to say, you know, how prepared are they for us makes sense.
Right.
Great.
And is the idea your association, the OCAPE, compile this data and then the member organizations look at it and try to figure best where are improvements that can be made?
Right. So
You know,
all
where
of this
they do
data,
things right.
all of this data is either collected now, or there is a process by which a system of collecting that data is going to be put into place. So in each of these cases, it looks a little bit different. So, I mean, I can just run through it. So test pass rates for completers, as I said, that's a required federal report. So that actually is accessible on the Department of Education website. So that's where that would be collected. We submit it both to the US DOE and to TSPC. Common Candidate Assessment, that'll be there isn't one that yields a standardized test score in Oregon right now, though there is a common assessment, the teacher work sample. At the March TSPC meeting, I believe there will be a proposal to implement a common candidate assessment that yields a specific numerical score. So whether
It's not a work sample, or you don't know what format?
Well,
GPA.
that's a complicated,
Okay.
I mean, it's not a complicated question. The question is, will the commission adopt one of the existing national measures that DPA is the one that will be
Okay.
brought forward by the executive director? I'm hoping there is yet a discussion of what alternatives there might be. So common candidate assessment is likely to become clearer soon. Hiring data will probably be done on an institution by institution basis. There's not a common data collection structure in place right now, but I mean, it's a pretty straightforward thing to do, although having it be required and presented in a certain way will be a new development.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then the final two, the Alumni and Employer Survey, is a policy development that OACTE has itself taken on and will implement after probably a year and a half of development in about a month. The surveys are all done, they're ready to go. We're just waiting on the employer and alumni contact data, which we will get from TSPC, who gets it from ODE. So that's been a kind of complicated survey to both develop and implement, and we're right on the cusp of pushing it out.
Just one addition, Scott pointed out that hiring data, although it sounds like it should be simple to track, is not simple, and we don't yet have good systems that allow the colleges to easily find out what happens when Kim graduates and in the fall is hired in Mount Hood, and then the following year might be over in another community, or doesn't get hired for a year. So there is a small amount of funding that was set aside in the strategic investments to bring together several data requests that are going to be asked of all of the of our educator workforce. One around supply and demand so that we can better anticipate where geographically we have need as we look at 2020 and anticipated employment need again. And then also looking at data on the minority teacher report, which is now required through Senate Bill 755. And then also looking at the graduator, the completer data, hiring and retention. So we have a small data team that is sitting down together. They have not met. They're going to probably meet in early March to begin to say, what does it look like? And we have a dean on there from both the public and somebody from the privates to say, this is what we need to be able to get our hands on so we can use it for program improvement. And then we have the systems, ODE and TSPC, present, as well as the Oregon School Personnel Association, to help us figure out how do we connect the existing data so that we can do that and make it easier for people to get that.
Any other questions or comments from committee members? Mark? Kim?
Nope.
Okay. So I have one because I want to continue to focus this committee on what our charge is. And that's really around, so it's kind of two parts. One is about timelines and next steps, and the other one is really about for us specifically as a committee. So do you anticipate anytime soon that there might be some things that our committee could help encourage moving forward, or that we could recommend to OEIB in terms of policy or key investments?
Ooh, that's a potentially long list.
Yeah.
The more I think about it. So let me take the investment side first. And let me use the Common Candidate Assessment as an example. And the story that I think we need to talk about at the next commission meeting in March is the trajectory of a proposal over the last, let's say, 2 years that might have brought the teacher work sample with its long and successful tradition in Oregon to be a credible alternative to an off-the-shelf assessment tool. And the reason I'm saying this now is because the difference between being able and not being able to do that was there was no capacity to invest in its development. So in terms of what a body like the OEIB could do, although it was a complicated situation, is to think of ways to support the kind of development of these tools, whatever they might be in particular related to this kind of reporting or this kind of data collection and analysis, to empower professionals in the state to be able to do the work, and to depend as little as possible on these more, as I described them, off-the-shelf standardized products that the accountability corporate world is full of. So I know that's kind of abstract. I've been using the Common Candidate Assessment without telling the long story behind it. But there are ways, I think, that the OEIB could back research and development in the state that would help us develop more appropriate tools that would make us less dependent on these more generic and corporately sponsored assessment products. So that's on the investment side.
Okay.
On the policy side, I'd go back to your comment earlier that focusing on identifying and raising the qualities of the profession and helping us all work together in a collective and proactive and productive environment is going to be much more likely to yield the results that we want, which is better performance in the classroom, better achievement by students, more equitable outcomes, than an accountability culture that's driven somehow by power and fear. So helping us have and continue to sustain that kind of conversation, to be allies, to be focused on our collective responsibility in these areas, as opposed to looking at policy leverage points that use reward and punishment as their fundamental motivations.
That's a great point, and so I'm going to put the onus on really both of us. So as you go through this work, if you will keep that question in your mind, and if there are opportunities, Hilda is definitely our great link to what's going on in all the higher ed area. We are going to look at later today kind of a draft of what we might give to groups to say, you know, how can we help you with this? And to focus, I think we should be helping not only around policy and investment, but also to call around about best practice. And I think you were getting at that here, in that sometimes because we have these requirements, we grab the closest thing that fits the requirement. And I think what you're suggesting is that we invest and look at really the best practice way of doing some of these things.
Absolutely.
And we continue to call that out as a profession. So I just think that's on all of us doing this work to continue to do that. I also want to remind, I know I said this earlier, but just to remind all of us, it feels like there hasn't been a lot presented to OEIB around the work going on into teacher preparation, both what work TSPC is doing as well as the bodies that you talk about. And so even if we don't have any very specific recommendations, I want to make sure that we go forward and at least use the opportunity when we get on the agenda for this topic,
April.
for OEIB, if we could use that opportunity to begin to call out, here's the areas around best practice, so that as we as a committee could sort of back you and whoever else might be presenting in, here's something that we support. So we're asking groups, you know, where do you need us to help push on policy and investments right now? And where we don't have that, where can we begin to call out together as a profession and in this birth to career work, the best practice? So it gets continued to be called out, so it becomes a hallmark of our work. And I just think we as this committee have to do that a little more and more as well. Because I think it's as much about best practice as it is the investments and policies, because pretty soon, hopefully, we're going to be down the road on those things, and we really are going to be focusing on what those best practices are. Okay, Hilda, did you want to?
Yeah, just one addition to what Scott pointed out. There was a rather significant chunk of funding that was designated to support the development of reliability and validity for the teacher work sample methodology that all institutions in Oregon are currently required to use. The issue is that everybody does it differently, and that not all institutions are in a position to bring to bear the psychometric rigor that really needs to be there to address comparisons to a nationally developed and psychometrically sound instrument developed at Stanford University. So part of what happened was that funding was riding on the coattails of some work that had happened at the Oregon Association for Colleges of Teacher Education in partnership with the Teacher Standards and Practices Commission. And an RFP before OEIB was formally started had already gone out, and one proposal had been received. And I think there were two issues really from my perspective. One was that the cost of sustaining a system is expensive. You have to keep training your scorers. You have to keep going in and randomly, independently evaluating the performance assessment to ensure that there is real reliability in how those are scored. The work sample as it stands right now in most institutions is not subject specific. It is more of a generic model. And then I think the second piece of that was that the model for doing it separately for the state of Oregon counted really on everybody being on board, and that there would be some institutional support based on your number of your candidates that you prepare every year, so that there'd be a sort of a graduated fee that would support the state system of continuing this forward. And I think it was, for lots of reasons, I don't think we had every single institution ready and on board at that time. So I just think that's important background information. I know that this committee heard a little bit about this earlier in the fall meeting when Vicki Chamberlain and Randy Hitz and Sue Hildick joined us. But like Scott, we're sort of looking at what will happen at the March meeting and to see whether or not there are other options, and we'll go from there. And those funds right now are just, they are still sitting there with the intention that if there is an adoption of EdTPA, that there would be a plan developed to support professional development and support for faculty to understand how to move forward with implementation, so that there was as much of a movement forward as possible. So it's not like those funds would be withdrawn and not dedicated to this intent.
So that conversation sounds so similar to all the ones we have inside the K-12 system too, about work samples and alternative assessments and all of that. So, but again, I think the importance of calling out, we recognize as a profession there's a need for this kind of assessment or information, and we want to do a good job. All the things you talked about all the work that needs to be done to make it be a good, I think it's important to keep calling those things out so the public in general understands the rigor that we want to hold ourselves to as a profession before we do things. That this isn't just about pushback and we don't want accountability. It's about we want to do it right, so that when we get the data, like you said, we know it's really telling us what we think it's telling us. So I think that's the angle we should take when we go to OEIB as a best practice board, to say we support these efforts because of this reason. It's important to us as a profession, not just important to the public. Right. We want people to know this about us, and here's the rigor we're going through. So here's the timeline, and then here's the need. Here's where we need policy support, and here's where we need investment support. Okay? Anything else?
Well, I'm just wondering if April, which is when we have set aside time for this committee to bring back a topic around teacher preparation to the full board, whether or not you anticipate there'll be more action would have been taken on this by then.
Lots more action. So let's see, which April? I don't know if we'll have the survey results, but it will be done. They should go out in March, 4-week window. A common teacher candidate assessment decision, I suspect, will have been made.
I meant this. The performance, this profile list.
I think it depends entirely on the commission. Because CAPE has already issued their annual report, so we're all sort of jumping at that right now. I think the commission is going to be focused on the common candidate assessment. To the extent any of that energy gets put towards this, it could change, but I suspect not. I think those other items will consume the commission's energies, and it's up to sort of them to take the next step. So what I've said to Vicki and Keith is that my recommendation for the next step is that the full OACT membership discuss this, because again, it's only been presented as an information item to them. We have not discussed it as a
When
whole.
would that happen?
Well,
I mean, could have.
so we meet the day before every TSBC commission meeting.
Okay.
So meeting in March, the next meeting is in July. Okay. So as soon as TSBC acts, we would act. So, this is our contribution to the start of the conversation. They will move it forward in the context of their program approval subcommittee. So, as I said, the only way I can answer Tilda's question is by trying to guess what they're going to do. And my guess is they're going to be busy on this common candidate assessment.
Okay. So, Hilda, I think what we should do for OEIB is be ready to connect the dots for OEIB around the audit, and not just because of the audit, but what the profession itself has been wanting to do, so we can connect that. And then we can say, help them understand the scope of the work, because there's a lot of big pieces in that. And then, so here's what we're focusing on right now, and here's what we've completed. I think if we could sandwich all of that together and get presenters
Put a
that
panel
represent,
together.
that represent all
Yeah.
the efforts going on there, even if we don't fully explain all of them. I think the scope of work here is pretty amazing. I'm still trying to get my head around it every time we hear about it. I understand one piece deeper, so it's a lot of work, but I just think we haven't done our job yet of calling out all the great work that's going on around teacher preparation.
A panel with the usual suspects or unusual suspects would be good.
That'd be great. Okay. Anything else before we move on to the next agenda item? Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you, I appreciate the time.
Sure.
Very much.
You're welcome to stay with us, but yeah, if you need to go, feel free.
Sorry.
That's great.
Too quick out of the script.
I understand. Just wanted you to feel fine. All right, the next item on our agenda is the importance of the early literacy, focus on age 3 to grade 3. Serena Wesley Stoudemire from OEIB, Early Transitions. Did I say your name right?
Just switch Stoudemire.
Stoudemire Wesley, okay, sorry.
Okay.
OEIB, Early Transitions Equity and Community Director. And I've been hearing so much about the work Serena's doing already, so I'm excited to hear from you.
Oh, thank you. I too am going to have to leave early, so I'm going to keep it pretty short.
Okay.
But what my job is to really express the importance of early literacy from those age 3 to grade 3. And that involves involving parents, so parenting visit, parent engagement, child care providers, and engaging the community and helping with increasing the literacy and early learning. It's really important that through this transition, so kids are learning to read, but the transition is also getting them ready after they're learning to read, but also being ready to read to learn. And slow down here so I can get it right. And I think a lot of kids aren't ready for that. As you probably saw the report in the Oregonian the other day, especially out in the rural counties, I noticed that the levels were really, really low. And so as we started our statewide reading campaign, we were talking about statewide, but looking at those communities with the low scores. It's for all children, even though the focus was on children of color, underserved communities, children in poverty. It's really high. And so we really want to push it. We want to get everybody involved, get everybody at the table that's involved in early learning and early literacy going and pushing this effort forward, this strategic effort forward. There's so many names for it right now. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly to call it. So, but it's, and it's also important to get those families involved because the parents are the first touch with that child, and that the children are really going to follow their parents and be there. And if we can get those parents involved and those children involved, then that's going to change the dial. When I was looking at the report, I noticed the schools that had a lot of wraparound services, their numbers were a little bit higher. So that also goes to show that all that community support is needed in order to move the dial for those children. And I hope everyone will see that too, and I hope everyone will get involved with that too as we get started. We'll be getting started next month or so that we can prepare to study with the summer reading programs. And that's what Parks Recs, that's what libraries, that's what child care providers, that's what a little bit of everybody. And so we're hoping that everybody's going to be on board on that. The other part of my job with equity is to make sure that it's done in an equitable way. So how do we get those kids to come up to where some of those other kids are, but also not forgetting that those other kids are already there and what's going to work for all kids that are there, not just breaking out. So I'm making everybody feel a part and welcome at the table, and I think that's very important. And I know how that would feel to get left out. And it's not good to leave kids out, that's not good at all. It's not good for the kids. It also helps with their self-esteem. So if we get everybody there together, we'll be doing some holistic care, and I think that's really important. If we look at it holistically, and if we look at the big picture of things.
Can I ask a question about that? As I think about the equity piece and am very involved in the efforts around the dual language, especially for Spanish-English dual language, because that's the growing need in our state. Will there be any focus on that, the importance of maintaining L1 or original language where possible, or where those efforts are happening, so that there is political support for that as well? Because otherwise, in some communities, we sort of fight the battle of it needs to be English only, instead of helping educate people about what we know about if you support L1, then that, you get to English.
Right, and it also supports the cultures too, and letting people know also that not everyone learns the same. And it's very important to keep that piece in there with the English learners. I just got off the phone on my way here with Von Tran from Portland Public Schools talking about English learners. And so it is really important that we keep that piece. And I don't know politically how that's going to work yet. This is my fourth week.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to look at the state ELL plan?
No, I haven't.
So, yeah, that might be
Okay.
a place to, because maybe you can help us as we move forward, how we make those connections and how we call that out. As somebody who helped with the beginning part of that work,
Yes.
I think it was just a placeholder to get some things started, and I think that there should be some annual review of that. In fact, we had recommended in that work that we put together a committee, and I don't know if that part has been done, but I would imagine at least connecting ODE and OEIB in the work that you're doing would be helpful, right?
Exactly.
And so I'm going to ask you the same question, not that you have to answer it right now, but for Scott, just to think about how we as a best practice committee can help you as you start on this campaign. Where we help around best practice, or I know we have key investments already in that piece of early literacy, so I think if we could all connect the dots and really get on this campaign.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very important for best practices. I think a lot of people relate more when they see what the best practices are. They understand it more, and they can get on board and be a part of that program. I think it's very important to make sure that all those pieces are very inclusive and that we're crossing agencies, making that cross connection piece. And so with the research and the best practice, oh my God, I don't think we can do it without it.
Right.
I think it plays a very important part.
And I think you probably know this, but there are some forums where these conversations cross over already naturally, and I think they've been more self-organized. It would be nice if we had statewide sort of organization around it, and that is things like the OLN conference, Oregon Leadership Network, the OALA, which is going on this weekend. Now we have the state ELL conference, which we're just going the next year. And what great places to bring that work and start the campaign so that we're all speaking the same language. So I just
Funny that you said that, because I was just showing Hilda an email I have, and I was getting a couple of the organizations mixed up because all the different acronyms. But the OLN and the Northwest, Education Northwest, you know, how do each piece play a part in what we're doing, and making sure that I have all of them.
The good news is some of us, most of us, are in all of them. We just keep meeting at different conferences.
I was like, okay, which one is this one?
So there's a lot of us who can help you, but I think it'd be great from OEIB to help with the connection of the work going on in all those organizations, because right now it's still kind of isolated and separate.
Yeah, and as I was meeting with Brett and Megan yesterday from the early learning area, we were talking about how important that is, and going out together to make sure people see a united front and that we're doing this all together, so that way it breaks down all the silos. And if we're talking about displaying a seamless system, we on the inside also have to make sure that we do our part to make sure that that effort comes and is visible to everyone that we're doing this. We want to make sure that there's no wrong door for families. We want to make sure that there's no wrong door internally as well as externally, and that the system is as seamless as possible so that anyone can just hop on board and get going with it moving forward.
That's great. So, Hilda, I don't know if you have ideas about next steps. Clearly, we're going to want to hear when you're ready to launch what that looks like and what we can help with. So I don't know what the timeline is.
Yeah, we just sort of wanted to make sure that you all, Serena had a good understanding of what her role would be. I think as you engage with Nancy Golden, you can clearly see that this is a key priority for her. And she is really focused on this and will continue to make this a top priority for all of the efforts that come out of OEIB, and we're just delighted to welcome Serena on board. And
Sorry for my nervousness.
not at all.
We could test your passion showed instead, so.
Yeah, it's, this is really important. I'm on my way now to play work, so I'm gonna have to run out too. And I'm trying to get around to a lot of the different programs. So for me, it's really important to see the work of what's happening from age 3 to grade 3. So I'm gonna get around the state, try as much as I can to get around the state to go look at the different programs and see what people are doing and how people can work together and get some consistency throughout the programs as well. So, especially out in the rural counties, because right now they're feeling like their voice is not being heard, and we want to make sure that those voices are being heard as well, and that they play an important role within the state as well.
Thank you.
Stay tuned.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here. Good to have you on board. All right, any other questions from the committee on that one? All right, so we're going to move on to our next piece, which is an opportunity for us to just have a little conversation. If you look for your document, that's 6.1, draft recommendation for OEIB. And this is about what I was asking both Serena and Scott about. I think it will be really helpful for us as a committee to say, so what are we going to do about all this great work going on, right? So why do we sit here and listen to all of these great reports, and what can we use our committee and our influence with OEIB to move forward on? So this is really just a draft of a conversation between Hilda and I think she's reworked it a few times. So I'd like for you to just take a minute as a committee and read it. If you haven't already, just refresh your memory, and then look at those key questions and see if we can ask them in any better way or streamline them, or is there something we're missing from the question. So let me just frame, for example, we would give this to someone who is wanting us to help them push forward to OEIB, some kind of recommendation. We would want them to come with this information, so we were real clear about what our role is. So I'll give you a couple minutes to look at that. Mark, are you still on?
I am.
Okay. So, Hilda, as the writer of this, do you want to give us?
Well, I think that I want to also just share with you that as we think about our scope of action, this is, we're heading into spring, I think. I'd like to believe it. My snowdrops are
says 6 weeks. But.
But as we do, we need to be really focused on consistently asking ourselves as committee, or having the committee ask themselves, what are the specific recommendations that we're bringing forward. So certainly as this, as you edit this, this is intended to be useful to you as well, not just to outside folks that may be talking to you. And in that vein, I just want to mention that Nancy Golden and OEIB staff and cabinet that includes Rob Saxton, Ben Cannon, and Gerald Hamilton from CCWD and several others, that we've been having the conversation that will probably make its way forward to the OEIB board meeting in March, and that is that we really want to be very clear about some guiding criteria that focus around strategic investments. And I can just give you a glimpse that I'm pretty sure that you'll hear the word transformational, not replacement dollars, sustainable in some fashion, because I think it's very easy, particularly after the last legislative session when we didn't have a cycle in place. I think many people looked at the strategic investments in 3232 and 3233 and thought, oh my goodness, I just need to go and talk with, the chief education officer and say, if you want me to work on this, give me X amount of dollars and I will do that. And I think she said, partly in jest and partly in truth, that if she tallied up all of the requests that she's already received from people informally, in the conversations she's had in the last 6 months, you'd probably faint the amount of money that it would require. So there's going to be a very concerted effort to hone that down, to really think about what are the transformational activities that are absolutely needed to move some aspect. And I do think this committee has a lot at stake with its focus on transitions in that. I also just want to mention that there's a document that precedes this called 6.0 Draft OEIB Equity and Partnership Subcommittee. And I wanted to include this in your materials today because similar conversation is happening in the Equity and Partnership Subcommittee. And in fact, Whitney Grubbs, who is temporarily staffing this committee after Doris moved to Alabama, put this together as sort of an intro piece that they're considering as kicking off their report on final recommendations. And I liked it so much that I said to Whitney, I'm just going to give this to Chair Curtis and her members so that if they want to see a similar format, we can start working on that and be ready for it.
What's that?
It's called 6.0, and it should be in your packet. It
It's
says
before the page.
draft at the top. Yeah,
The
it should be in
School
your,
Youth Investment and Policy
Yeah.
Recommendation. It's the one right before. the
there you go,
questions.
right
Okay.
there, yep. And it's just that it does a nice little intro, a purpose, and a reminder of how the equity lens ties into our work, and then it gives us sort of a framework for how we can report findings and then potential policy and/or investment recommendations. And the one other thing that Chair Curtis and I have had conversation about is the very nature of the word best practices in our subcommittee probably needs a deeper dig, and that we have a unique opportunity in that title to bring to the forefront best practices.
So from the committee, are there any, thinking about the document she just shared and thinking about this idea of bringing things forward to OEIB, is there anything you would recommend in terms of edits to this page? And as she said, it doesn't just drive what we request if people come to us, but it could guide our conversations. So for example, one thing I did think that I think we left off that I just heard you speak to, and that's that transition. Would we ask, what is the transition point we're talking about here? So for example, if it's teacher preparation, that transition is from preparation to the work field, right? So if we could call out, I mean, I think if we got used to a format, then when we're listening to people, when something's missing, we can say, where was that, right? Because I know if we don't see each other except once a month to get our heads back in the work, this could actually be that piece that anchors us.
I'd agree.
Yvonne, I have a couple suggestions.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
You know, I've seen it, I think it looks good, and it's a great framing document. The more we can simplify it quickly, the more someone will actually get on it. Couple of thoughts. The first one, you know, it says what challenge, issue, or barrier. I would say the second one needs to be what data supports this.
Good.
Okay, because we have it a little bit later down, what relevant best practices inform this recommendation. That's kind of the same thing. But I would say right off the bat, you need to say, you know, here's a barrier, here's an issue, and here's the data.
Right.
I also think we ought to include some sort of financial or investment aspect of it in there. You have what unique opportunities does this recommendation leverage or maximize. But I think calling out, again, we are all about transitions and investments. So if you could somehow, you know, the financial / investment, embed that in the document, and if there's any way to consolidate a few of them. I guess, you know, I'm just looking at that thinking, you could spend a lot of conversation with people on each one of those.
Right.
And, you know, I love it as a framing document. I would love to have a framing document like that, and then when we talk about, okay, the ELL plan, or we talk about 11 to 14, but we'll never get through all of those in a 2-hour meeting. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, some of it I think we can pull from what people have already done. I hear what you're saying, and I think streamlining as much as possible as we can. I'm almost imagining that when we go to OEIB on any one of these topics, if we use this as our framing, that we almost have a PowerPoint set of slides that sort of everything fits into those. So I'm just remember when we did the ELL plan, and it was right when we had the OEIB strategic plan, we had ODE strategic plan. The closer those look to one another, the easier it was for the whole board to see the alignment. And so
Right.
I guess
I
that's...
guess I'm thinking about like when we do goals here, you know, they're on one page and they're on your desk and we pull them out every meeting and they're on our agenda. Looking at this, it would be nice, I mean, I would like to have that sheet where I could stick on my bulletin board to help remind me that this is an important thing for this subcommittee that we're recommending forward. But it's got to be simple and not a big long narrative in each one of those boxes to do that.
Yeah, Hilda, just while you were talking, she made a suggestion, I think it makes sense, and that is that these questions inform the narrative behind whatever one-page bullet point we would have in front of us. So we go to OEIB and say, here's our recommendations, and then the narrative that answers all these questions is behind it.
That makes
Does
sense.
that make
That's good.
sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you'd be asking that big staff at OEIB to put all the best practices in an orderly fashion for you, Mark.
But they're so smart and so quick. The other thing I was just wondering is we think about the recommendations specifically around policy, well, maybe investment too, but I'm just wondering if there might be a suggested timeline. So for example, just looking at some of the things Scott was talking about, I think calling out and saying sometime in the future, these are some things for our group. We might not send all of them to OEIB, but just so we could get an idea of what the timeline looks like. So some of these are for 2 years or 3 years from now, and some we need right now because especially where it's around barriers or policies, it's going to have to time with the legislative session. And so I think giving the OEIB staff an idea that this is what people are hoping for would probably be helpful. Anything else, Kim, David?
Yeah, it's up there at the top, but I think we should probably put in one of the questions where you mentioned 40, 40, 20, because that's really what the OEIB is supposed to be focusing on. And I'm thinking maybe something about the key benchmarks. We've talked about like ready for kindergarten, third grade reading, I think is it 8th grade attendance or math?
We can just put each of
It's
those
something
in
there in the middle,
People can
high school
check.
completion, entering college.
They could just
Just
check.
something, how does this affect one of these benchmarks or something? Is there a connection to that? I think we'd probably integrate it maybe into one of the things like what benefit will this recommendation have for Oregon students? And I think another thing we need is just something too, and that could also be a part of that too, is just the connection to the another level or something. Is it just within one system? Is it just in the K through 12 system, early learning, or post-secondary, or is there some, you know, how do the other sectors levels contribute to it? So we're trying to get out of that silo way of looking at things.
That's a great idea, because when you think about the criteria you mentioned about sustainability, I mean, ultimately, I think that's what we want to ask people. If they're asking for key investment, I don't think it's sustainability on always going asking someone else to sustain, but how do you anticipate it gets folded in with the work you're already doing, because we're getting more streamlined and efficient, right?
Yeah, and especially if they're bringing it to the level of the OEIB rather than the ODE or the HEC, for example. I think that's got to be stressed here.
Great.
We can add that in that back.
Anything else?
No, that was a good suggestion.
Kim, have you thought of anything else you want to add?
No, I haven't.
Okay. And Lynn, are you on yet with us? No? All right. Hilda, anything else you need for guidance from us to further put together the next iteration of that?
Not on that, but I do think we've got some time set aside to dig in a little bit today and
Okay.
to try to see if we have any preliminary pieces. And if not, really coming up with a strategy about what OEIB staff can do to support you in bringing back if you need more information or you need that data that supports a recommendation. I really want to make that offer to you now so we're not crunched at the very last minute.
Okay. So I know we have kind of the list of the big, at least on my notes, the list of the big categories. Do we want to call those out, or are you just asking in general? Or should we go back to each one of those and say, where are we with those right now? Do you have a suggestion?
We can see if there's anybody that has some things that they want to start putting on the table and go from there, I think.
Okay. So we'll start with committee. Mark, since you have to leave us soon. Are you still there?
I am.
So do you want to go first? Are there any items you want to call out?
No, I like it the way it is. I like Dave's recommendations.
So any of the topics that we've talked about since our committee formed, are there any on the top of your mind that you think we ought to be driving to recommendations to OEIB in the next couple of months?
Yeah, I have one, Yvonne.
Okay.
And I'm just kind of a random thought here that, you know, our main two big transitions are the early learning to the 11 to 14. And I think there's a lot of 11 to 14 work going on that we, you know, that one maybe doesn't need to be as much the priority because there's so much happening. But with the hubs, what isn't really, at least in my world, is it's all work about formation. It's not a work about best practices within the hubs. Mm-hmm. In particular, when you break the hubs down and the 0 to 2, you know, prenatal to 2, which is so health oriented, and then age 3 to 3rd grade reading, the 3 to 3. Right now, it seems like the conversations I'm having are formations, governance, funding streams, but there isn't a lot of guidance on what are the best practices from 3 to 3. Mm-hmm. And I talked to Jada. Jada's not there, is she?
No.
No, she was
okay.
testifying.
So I talked to yeah, I was just checking in because she could add more to it if she was. But I talked to Jada about, you know, I would like to see, coming out of the Early Learning Council, I want to know what are the best practices transitioning from 0 to 2, 2 to 3, 3, you know, see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think this is one we should tackle is, what are the best practices for a hub with 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds? What are the best practices for all-day kindergarten? You know, I know there's a lot of work going on here, but I would think it would be up to this committee to kind of be listening to presentations following that. It is, you know, the obvious number one return on investment. There's a lot of energy after the KRA was released. But I would recommend that we focus, you know, pretty heavily on those transition points from prenatal to 3rd grade.
That's a great idea. You just gave me a huge sense of relief because I'm in one of those areas where we're still swimming around the formation and governance, and to think about a best practice conversation. And one of the things that I've asked for too, and so you just said it better than I've been able to, and it's that, okay, we already know there's something out there that tells us what we should be doing. Let's just say it and get it out there and stop just trying to leave everything to grassroots. Not everything needs to be grassroots figuring it out in Oregon.
Right, like at COSA, you know, I sat in on the all-day kindergarten, and, you know, I'm listening to this. I finally just asked the question, okay, tell me what it looks like when a kindergartner arrives in the morning and then leaves at 3 o'clock. How is that different than his current experience? And we just kind of looked at each other, and it was just more of the same type of half day adding to it. And I don't know enough about it, but I'm not assuming that's best practices. Yeah. So maybe that's a starting point.
Yeah, good point.
What does the research really say an all-day kindergarten program should look like? These are the core elements. I would see that as one of our tasks.
Mark, that was really good. And I think that should be for each of those components, so not just that kindergarten, which is what you were saying, is that we need to look at the best practice in each of those component
but I think he's
areas.
saying the opportunity is we're moving to that in 2015, and I keep saying as a superintendent, I don't want my folks figuring it all by themselves in a silo. I want I want to be able to say, here's the best practices, how close are we?
Mhm.
I mean, even if there were some frameworks for, those rubrics where you can identify where are you on this continuum, are you just starting, are you moving along?
Right.
I love that suggestion, Mark, and I think a point we should make is that we are investing as a state, and I know there's an argument about are we getting more, are we getting what we need to do that? The point is, we are going to be spending state money on full day kindergarten. So it is a huge investment, whether we get more or not.
Mhm.
It is, and it's also the launching point to wrap around when you look at the prenatal to 2. That's really not as much educational outcomes as healthcare outcomes. And it gives us as OEIB a chance to reach across to the CCOs. I know that's important to the governor. So, it just makes sense that all the work that's going on, and I'm not talking reinventing the wheel, because there are a lot of groups just like the 11 to 14. There are a lot of groups that are working on this that do have research, do have recommendations. We just need to spotlight it and focus on it.
Mark, you made me also think about our conversation with Serena, and then also linking back to our one with David about the ELL stuff. So we know there's sort of laundry lists in every category, but what if we use this as the opportunity to link? We know that early literacy piece obviously should be a part of that kindergarten, and then where, for example, looking at that data we did in some of the other questions I asked on our phone conference about gaining those levels of proficiency quicker. So
Yeah,
what if
I like that, Yvonne. And when you think about it, just you saying that triggered this. What is our biggest investment that the legislature is about to make in the next session? It's all-day kindergarten. So we as an investment group should be all over that as a number one priority. Then we can embed ELL. Then we can embed the hubs and all these other aspects right with it. It's almost like this should be a standing agenda item type thing.
Yeah, I like it. I love the convergence of all of that work, because maybe we could set the pace for each of those transition points to converge the work. So right now, ELL, literacy, early learning hub, but specifically at that full day kindergarten and kind of what's going there. Not that we wouldn't name all the others, but if they needed to prioritize, where do we start? That makes sense. I love that idea. Streamlines for everyone, holds us all accountable. And I think it gives people like Serena, who are trying to get on top of everything right now, a focal point to start here and work maybe first with the groups that are doing that work. Great idea.
You bet. Well, I'm glad you like that. I've got to split on to the next one, guys.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Who can top that suggestion?
That was great.
So I just wanted to look at my list here of the things that we have addressed. So ELL was part of it. So I started thinking about this morning on the treadmill while Hilda and I were having an early morning conversation. The idea about, I guess you're kind of addressing it here in a format, but I'm just wondering if there aren't some key places where our committee should do a white paper. And so we've asked, for example, and I'm just thinking out loud. So we asked for this data from the ELL, and we know there's a bunch of stuff that has to get done in the ELL plan. But so one idea is focusing specifically around this. But when we ask for data, it seems like we should say, here's what we're learning and where we think this information should go. So when I looked back at some of the stuff that Brian Reeder had put in there, and then the comments that both David and Mark were making as we had the phone conference this last time about asking more questions, we're having these ahas, and then we have more questions, right? And it seems like as a best practice group, if we ask for data, we get it, we should ask, so now what? And then we should turn to a group and say, so since we've all learned this together, we think we ought to go find out this or do something about it, right? And I know it's just kind of out there in the air, but when a white paper gets written by a group, at least I've noticed in the state, it starts to be referenced. And it has a little bit more power than just showing up on an agenda some part. And I think we'd want to be choosy because Hilda's already busy and so am I. But like I kept looking at that data for ELL and I'm taking it to my district and saying, this is really interesting and I want to ponder it and discuss it more with others. So one suggestion I was thinking is taking it to the ELL conference and asking a group of people to discuss it and think about it. But we should do more with that than just ask for the data and have an aha and then it goes nowhere.
I'd like to recommend that I think the ELL staff that have come on board now in the Educational Equity Office should and could assist with that. So I would be more than willing to convey that request from you, and if you'd like to schedule a phone conference with David so that he could think about who might be able to assist in putting that together. We have very knowledgeable, smart people in those jobs, and now that the RFPs are sort of off their immediate plate, I think that might be a next step that they could help with. I do not want to look at Hilda as an expert on this at all.
No, but as the sort of convener of the task. So I feel like we kind of have landed on two really big things, and one is this joining of groups to come together with the recommendations around answering these questions with providing background information, which includes the data, and then the key points we're going to get real good at being able to say and articulate because we're going to recommend them. And then the other piece is when we learn things, where might we as a best practice panel want to put forward a white paper? And right now we're suggesting that we've had a lot of conversations around the ELL. We're having some ahas as we look at that data and more questions.
Right.
So now let's turn to the experts and say, put this together for us.
I think that sounds great.
I would
Really
love
good,
to know that at the end of the year we have not only the recommendations but some key learnings that we can call out and say, here's what we know now for the state.
Yeah, I think that's
cool.
Yes, very
Okay,
exciting.
keep
I think
going.
there's a real demand for that too in the districts.
Oh, I would agree.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if it's for us or the subcommittee that works with standards, but there was some talk at the HEC, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, about better aligning high school completion and high school standards in foundation courses, math, sciences, English, with those in college entrance, the 100 level courses, for example, when they get into college, a better alignment of those. And like I said, I don't know if it's so much for this committee to take on, but the HEC's view is it should be something for the OEIB, since there's a transition between high school and post-secondary.
Can you say that again? It's an alignment of the standards?
So, yeah, I mean, as an example, if you complete college algebra and then you're entering the next step if you complete high school algebra or writing and you're entering the next step in college, is that the appropriate level? I mean, is there a gap there, or are you repeating information? It should not be a gap. It should be you complete high school level algebra and you go into the appropriate college math course.
So it seems like you're asking for two kinds of alignments. One is alignment of the standards from high school through college on a given sort of content area where there's a hierarchy. And the other one is the alignment kind of around the courses. So it's, because sometimes just aligning standards doesn't necessarily mean we've aligned the courses, because that work has to dig deep.
Well, the curriculum too, obviously, yes.
So I'm real pleased to say that there is a group that's focusing on this.
Good.
Oh, good.
I've mentioned before, and we brought forward that definition of college and career readiness. That was just one task that a cross-sector group took on to move this discussion forward, because once you have an understanding of a common definition, then you can start laying your strategic plans looped back to that definition, and it poses the policy questions that exist when you say, well, if we're trying to align these together so that students exit high school both ready for entrance into career or career pathways or post-secondary, then you have something to work with. So there was a grant that was received from the Rockefeller Philanthropic Group, and it's in its second year. It is called Core to College. You might have heard of this before. And I got involved with them this summer when they came and talked to me, and I realized they were sort of over here operating, as grant-funded things do sometimes, with some nice deliverables, but they weren't hooked into all of the sectors that I thought needed to be part of that, including the employment division. So they have joined this cross-sector group, and they have a work group that's called the alignment group. Now, here's one of the questions that they're trying to deal with. We're about ready, as you said, we're investing in full-day kindergarten, but we're also investing in Common Core state standards implementation, investing in the use of Smarter Balanced Consortium, whether, timing-wise, whatever. And the question has been raised, so if every 11th grader is going to be asked to take an assessment that predicts their college and career readiness, then shouldn't that begin a conversation about the alignment for placement procedures at community colleges and four-year institutions? Shouldn't there be a connection there? Because that would be the worst thing that we do to kids, to say, okay, in 11th grade you did really well, and we thought you were on your way, and then a year later you arrived at a four-year or community college, and either you didn't do well on the placement test that was given and then you backtracked, or you weren't given the right remediation while you were still in high school to help you be absolutely ready. So that's the policy set of questions that group is digging deep into, and the representation includes both faculty from community college and four-year institutions. In fact, if you'd like, I can send you all the roster.
If you could send us some information on that. It's the first time I've heard about
So
this.
what authority do they feel they have then to inform, like, the work of the HEC and OEIB? Are they still
don't have
just out there?
authority. They don't have authority, but it was very much recognized by the cross-sector group that Ben was a part of, that we needed a group that would begin thinking about this even now. We're not quite ready yet. We don't even know the complete alignment between even Smarter Balance and NAEP and any of the other assessments, ACT, etc. But we wanted people to start the conversation. So that group has been then going out. They brought it to the agenda of the CIA, which is not what you think it is. It's curriculum, instruction, assessment. It's the combined group
That
in the
assessment
community
was
college
there,
that they're in charge of all. They're in charge of all of the instruction, the academic affairs, if
Must
you
be
will,
assessment.
of the community colleges. So they're bringing it to that group. They're bringing it to the admissions group. And Lisa, you might remember the
I'm
name.
actually on the group.
There you go.
The SCS Placement Policy Group. So,
Yes.
Yeah. So it's gone through ICAR, which is our college admission and registrars, and they also, part of the college and career readiness, they did the Math 111 alignment, which was looking at, and I wasn't involved with that part of it, but it was actually looking at Math 111 across the universities and aligning that to high school. And what we find too is, I also do the course approval, and I think Algebra 1 is the exit requirement for high school, but we require Algebra 2 level or above, which is met by different courses. So there's kind of a disconnect there as well. But sorry.
No, I didn't mean to stop you. Go ahead, and then I'll answer.
I just jumped in. I don't know if I'm supposed to jump in.
No, that's absolutely perfect.
But that is actually, so the SBAC, the placement policy, the last meeting was really good. We got a lot of stuff done. Looked at some of the stuff Washington had done in terms of placement policy with SBAC. And, if somebody, achieves a score like Kelly was saying in 11th grade, what does that look like for the senior year? Are there different trajectories based on what kind of career path they want to take? So if you're going to go into medicine, maybe you want to take calculus or, whatever that might be. So I think recommendations are going to come out of that. We actually have a grid of stuff we're looking at right now.
So you said recommendations are coming out, and I heard you ask the question about, does it belong in the HEC or does it belong here? Should we invite them to bring recommendations here, being that we're looking after transitions?
The HEC seems to believe it belongs in the OEIB because it involves
All right,
high
so
school to
let's just
college.
take it on.
But whether it involves this particular subcommittee, the OEIB, that's my question, because it could
What?
also be, there's a standards subcommittee too, if you're talking about curricular standards.
We do have a standards subcommittee.
Isn't there?
So it feels to me like if it
Yes,
doesn't
ours.
go to a subcommittee, it's going to have a hard time landing on OEIB.
There you go.
So I think that it's going to necessarily need to involve folks from HEC. And so one step we could, first of all, they are not ready for any public real discussion yet. They're just in the
Yeah, the last meeting
initial
was-
stages.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
we've had a little transition with personnel in that grant, so we're just now, we think we're still going to have a meeting in this month. But there's just a little hiccup and we're fixing that. So my guess is that by May, we might be ready to have something, at least an update. And perhaps at that time, we'll have the coordinator for the project. And maybe we could invite a couple of folks from HEC to listen in. So that there is this
That would be good.
sort of, not just you as the only liaison, taking
That would be good.
forward. Does that sound like something
Maybe there's
so that
even
we
a
can
way
work on
to
together?
overlap some of the HEC members with our meeting
Yeah.
to join in, not just listen in, but maybe
Yeah.
join with us. So would it be helpful, even though people aren't ready, being that we're coming up with this framework of how we would like to have things brought to us if we're going to help move them forward, would it be helpful to at least share that we're open to being a body at least, to help move these recommendations forward, given that we think transitions is our responsibility, and here are the things we ask you to think about and look at in that?
Yep.
I just been in so many committees in this state where when you said look at, that's what I was going to ask you. We look at a lot of things, but where we ever move forward on anything, and I know I've been in those groups where we just spin and spin and spin, and we all have these great ideas, and then we look around and we say, so who's really going to do anything about this? And I guess I just want to say, let's do something about it, especially if all those great thinkers are coming up with some great ideas and they've collaborated and they've treaded the ground in each of their groups. We should do something with it.
Well, and I think it has to, eventually there will be some OEIB,
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of policy stuff around that, so that if you're, if you've met the Smarter Balanced Assessment criteria for math, let's say, in 11th grade, but you haven't met the seat time requirement, what does that look like? Because there's going to be a change between the, 3 years of math that's required, and college entrance, that's going to be another thing. I think there's going to be a lot of policy things related around that.
So when we think about our earlier conversation of making the links, so I know because we're a district applying for the Eastern Promise grant, we know there's Eastern Promise and there's some others that are going to be funded, so we've got investment going there. Where is the crossover from what those groups are already doing? Because I know in ours we're working on exactly math like you're talking about with PCC, and I know there's some momentum and excitement both at PCC level as well as in our high schools about this is really exciting, we're moving somewhere.
Right.
And again, so we're not working in silos. I don't know how we take what we funded in key investments and ask those groups, what are you learning? What do you need help with? Because they're all kind of doing something a little bit different and they're very focused on what they want to get done. But how do we say, let's take the good learning and the good work up a notch to the work that's getting done where it can actually happen in policy? Because I think we all know if it's working in one place, why wouldn't we just do it for the whole state? Why do we keep making everybody reinvent their own pathway?
Well, and there's also a connection, when you're talking about Eastern Promise, between proficiency-based assessment that happens in the classroom and Smarter Balanced Assessment. When we were doing PASS, we always had crosswalks to OAKS, SAT, ACT, and various second languages and things like that. So there's some, we have those silos that have to cross over at some point as well, so that somebody's not getting, they're not, not making it in the classroom, but here they can do the test or, things like that, or vice versa. So
I'm thinking about how good you are at making charts, Hilda, and I'm thinking
They've
about
already
this idea.
got a chart.
Well, I
But
just
think
keep thinking of
what you've addressed is
who's
that-
all working on 11 to 14 and who should be all
Yeah.
They are, by the way, on your little chart that I gave you 2 months ago about who's working on 11 through 14. So that group
Okay.
is listed
Good,
on there.
okay. Well, it's
Yeah.
something, I mean, obviously we'll have to wait for their work. but
Yeah,
it's
right.
something we should have on our radar.
Very good point.
And what is interesting is that it's a kind of a massive coordination right now, but we are keeping our eye on the movement forward of things like the Court of College work, the Eastern Promise, and the Accelerated Learning Committee. So just be aware, and the bill that was introduced this week around 2 free years of community college, that still has legs with the task force that will probably get approved, but that'll be on HEC, I believe.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
So it is, and then of course the HEC Subcommittee on Student Success. So believe it or not, we are keeping our eye on all of these balls, and that gives me a perfect segue to introduce somebody who has joined our staff this week. This rounds out our complete OEIB staff, and that is David Martinez from Portland Community College. He's not here with us here today in the room, but he will be. He and I met to sort of talk about what this committee is focused on. And he comes with a rich background from PCC, having been also in a four-year institution, primarily around admissions and that alignment and the support for students that's necessary, particularly for underrepresented students, to make that seamless path. So Nancy was very clear that she wanted team membership. Serena bringing in the focus around the early transitions, and David Martinez around that transition, high school into post-secondary and career pathways. So it's coming together. It's a big plate, and we're just kind of keep pushing it forward, making it smaller and tighter. But there's definitely going to be recommendations. For example, I will update you that the Accelerated Learning Committee will be receiving a first draft of some policy language around what's needed at our state in order to create more access for students through a college bearing credits while they're still in high school. So we've been systematically looking at the barriers, looking at best policies from other states, and looking at what kinds of parameters we highly value in a model that might be workable, or models. And then we're in the process now of looking at what would that cost, where would the funding be. So all of that is moving forward parallel to the work of this committee. So my role is just to keep you connected enough to keep you interested in coming to these meetings, and knowing that you are going to get something that will be brought forward that's happening in a parallel, I started to say parallel universe, but we are all in the same universe.
So how do we connect the dots from the group doing that work and the group doing the standards alignment? And
Well, first off, I would recommend that we will in May probably have a focus both on a presentation from David Edwards around the model. It might even be April. Around, I'm trying to think, it won't be March, it will probably be April, for what's going forward to the Accelerated Learning Committee.
okay.
And as soon as we handle some transition issues with the Court of College project, we'll get on the agenda to bring their work forward. I don't want to speak for them at this point, but we'll find the right time to do that. And then I think those will all get folded in. I would also suggest that I gave you last meeting a list of some topics that we're running into around a misalignment of placement practices, and the fact that the senior year is not necessarily being fully maximized by many students. So that document, it was just a running list of some of the issues and barriers that we're hearing in the conversations at Accelerated Learning Committee, at this Court of College, and when Nancy is out meeting with folks. So those all become there were some recommendations, very drafty, but there were some recommendations that were at the bottom of that page.
Okay,
So-
and that reminds me, I did ask Shelley Berman, who is the
Right.
chair of the work group from COSA, and I think they're going to be ready to come to us in March, because COSA is the superintendent work group, that is also working on the 11 to 14, and they have some very specific recommendations. Some are policy and some are key funding, but there's such overlap.
It is amazing overlap, which is
Yeah.
very good because it means it's
Right.
coming from various groups, but we're all focused and very much of agreement around some necessary things that need to happen.
So I think from what I saw in their first round of the paperwork, there is a calling out of some misalignment. So we should look at that other document.
It
see
specifically
how
is
we-
listed in there.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to make sure we have that there.
Okay.
Guess I lost it. Great work though, really. Oh, I just wanted to share just a really exciting, hopeful story that I think really makes all of this work exciting. So our school district has been watching in on the Eastern Promise stuff for a really long time and trying to figure out how we can connect in. And the monies now are all separated, and so it makes it more complicated, but we're going to figure it out. In the meantime, we just kind of latched on around this thing around Spanish. So our Spanish teachers met with their Spanish teachers and are aligned with the Eastern Promise. We just got them together in October. Our kids, we have dual language. We do see your L1 in Spanish as an asset. We already have kids who've earned a total of 300 credits, college credits through Eastern Promise since October by just simply passing the Spanish test. So talk about valuing your first language. These are kids who are still struggling in English. They're still struggling in academics. I know, it just gives me goosebumps. I just heard this yesterday. And we're on track to be at 600 in the next 2 months. And our teachers are struggling to even count and add up. And because the cost through, so here's where we get into this cost thing. We had the opportunity to try this with another couple of campuses who wanted to charge $100 a credit. Eastern is doing it for $10. So for kids, specifically this population, tell me, which one can they afford better, $120 or $1,200 to get these credits? For kids who are struggling and see that college can't even be a possibility, and they can do this. Now these, I think, we decided to start with our seniors and juniors and catch them before they leave, but we intend to keep working through the system. So who knows, by fall of next year, once we move down to 8th grade all the way up, some of these kids can pass these classes and earn up to 24 credits as a freshman.
That's beautiful.
That's almost a minor in Spanish before I've even graduated or even on track to graduate from high school. And you think about that overlap, it just is, it's magical. And so that's what happens when we get these groups together and we just keep pushing on some of these questions. And nobody's losing, right?
Right.
Nobody's losing in this. Nobody's losing money. Nobody's losing. We're only gaining. So it's pretty exciting. And I know there's other great stuff. That's just the story that I heard this week, and I have to share it.
Wow.
Makes all our meetings worth it, right?
Sometimes.
Sometimes I think we sit in these meetings just talking about adults and barriers, and we don't know when anything actually gets done for kids. So maybe we should also call out those stories, right? Okay, so the only other one I think we haven't discussed that has been a part of our work has been the barriers and the challenges around rural schools and districts. And
I think Lynn was going to perhaps be able to address that. I know that I can review very quickly some of the initial things that we've learned from presentations to date, and then some initial recommendations that at least were provided to us from some of the presenters. I'm not, what's the word, endorsing them necessarily, I'm just sharing them. So we learned that achievement and graduation rates in many of our rural communities are average, and some may say satisfactory, but that the transition for many of those students to post-secondary is less promising. And there are a lot of factors that contribute to that. We also learned that the people and the systems and resources are so scarce to stretch across all of the needs that are present, that we have to really think carefully about what are the highest priorities that rural districts can take on given their limited number of personnel and time. I mean, we have places where superintendents are serving multiple roles, including, everything.
Bus driver and
But I was going to say bus driver, yeah. We also know that communities are still struggling when they bring great school leaders into their district or have local leaders emerge, both teachers and administrators, and then they lose them sometimes to other communities. We also know that we still have some inequity gaps around technology infrastructure. I was interested that President Obama is trying to roll out more broadband access. I don't know when that will impact Oregon, but that was certainly recognizing that need. There were some cases where we found that rural districts had didn't even have the kind of attractive recruitment potential to attract people to their positions. So they had cases where principals were living in other communities and driving in, and then there wasn't that sense of community. But what there was also mention of is that we could be doing a better job with noting existing professional development opportunities through the network, and that conversation just took off this past week in several different venues, where now that we have some strategic investments that are on the ground offering kinds of experiences, that we should be opening that up to a broader audience to make sure that people are aware of that. There was a discussion about a need for a depository of best practices so that people, even if I'm not part of an initiative, I know what's out there and I can start bringing those good ideas to my own community. And to link school improvement with community development. That was an undergirding recommendation, and it's kind of a hard one to say because it's not a concrete one, but I really heard our presenters bring that over and over, how important that is. If the community believes this is about sending Mark Lewis to college, and Mark is, the son of John Lewis and Martha Lewis, that makes it more of something I can get behind, rather than, oh my goodness, I might be losing Mark to another community because he's going away to college. So development pieces in there, and I don't know exactly what we do with that one.
So one of the things you and I talked about earlier is just continuing to reach out and vet those
Yes.
recommendations with, at least I know there's the Small
And
Schools
asking for
Association,
additional ones.
and I don't even know if that's the same group or a different group than the ones inside COSA that I know are having the conversation. So we should check and again try to align
Okay.
those conversations.
Would it be helpful for me to invite Michael Lasher to address this group at our next meeting?
Yeah, that would be great.
He's the, I don't know if they have an executive director, but he's the director of the Oregon Small Schools Association.
That would be great, because I can't remember who came up to me in a meeting and asked about it, but I got a sense that there was a view that we were leaving someone else, because they were saying who's representing us, and I kind of wanted to say, I don't know, don't ask, just come, because sometimes I don't know who all the groups are. So
And then
that would
maybe
be
you
great.
can put me in touch with the right folks through COSA.
Yeah, I'll call Craig and see. I'll write that down when I have to do
Yeah.
this.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Was there anything else we needed to do on the discussion of subcommittee roles and where we want to go with that before we move forward to the ELL and LEP conversation?
I've been trying to subtly update your scope of action. I haven't sent you a new one, but we bumped down a month or two and bumped certain things up, but we're still pretty much on target for completing most of our work. I should have said all of our work.
Okay, we'll move to 7.0, which is a conversation we want to follow up on. I know David and Mark had committed to being on a conversation with Brian Reeder and David from ODE around the LEP data. So how about if you just start? Where you had some questions and some key things that you brought up I think is important to bring back to the committee.
Yeah, it was really looking at, how proficient ELL students are once they've completed the course in academic English, and particularly we see that at the college level is, although their other language skills are very strong in English, sometimes there's a very hard transition making it into writing 115 or writing 121. So when we had talked about that on the phone, so something looking at that, and just the question really was, what does it mean when somebody scores a 4 or 5 at the high school level LEP, and maybe that is in alignment with the expectations in a writing 121 or a foundation level college course, at least for writing standards. How does that align?
That's a really good idea because I've heard a lot of the conversations about aligning, but nobody has talked about aligning the ELL standards with that, and if anybody's taken a peek at it. We tend to continue to address services for ELO in the ELD program in the school districts as a whole separate program. And actually it's a problem at the high school because it's a gate that keeps kids out of electives and other opportunities. So maybe if there's a way to join it with really the English.
And then, of course, our larger conversation was about students once they transition to 9th grade. If their, English language skills aren't strong enough, they don't seem to be progressing very well. And I think we have more questions about that too, right? I mean, basically, what does that mean? What levels are they at? When we're talking about transitioning to high school.
Yeah, one of the things I sort of added to the conversation was that we're studying in our district is we, for example, have kids who actually their parents graduated from our high school. Now they're in our schools as ELL students. And sometimes they'll be at LEP, language proficiency level 1 for 4 years. And research says they should be there 6 months. So asking ourselves those questions, it seems like and we talked about that, the standards, we ought to identify what should be the expectation, and that was the question we asked Brian to dig down into is, what is it looking like? So if that's what my district looks like, what is it looking like across our state? And what is research telling us it should look like? What's the gap? And then what best practices? And this is where we want David, and maybe this could be addressed in our white paper, right? At least calling out what those best practices are. Maybe that's an opportunity for them to name them first. So if we move them through those levels of proficiency, knowing that if they get to 9th grade and they're still in the program, they're much less likely to graduate and be on track through the system. Let's do something about that in here. So again, another opportunity to align some work, right? So
and I just think as we move ahead, it's important. I think it's important to look at what the level is and whatever it's. I'm not familiar with the ELPA score so much, but 4 or 5. What does that mean? And what levels are the students at? Because we were looking at cohorts, but in the post-secondary world, it's not what grade you're in. It's not even what age you are. You can be 80 years old and still be a level 1 English. So I think it's important to look at people's levels and how long they're in a level. I know maybe the system doesn't recognize that, and that's one of the challenges we've had with the data.
So are you saying that at the college level, you're not aware of what K-12 uses as what the descriptors are of those proficiency levels?
They're different descriptors.
Are
I'll
they?
say that, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Is there someone at the community college level that you think we could put together? Like, would it be somebody like Linda Herrera who came in to sit down with David and look at that sort of answer the question about how they align across?
It's
Sure,
the same
sure.
work that she was just talking
Yeah.
about standards. They're talking about
right.
starting with math. We need to do the
Yeah.
same thing
It's
with
just-
the ELL standards.
It's just when I think the point I'm trying to make though is when you're saying somebody's in ninth grade and they're not progressing, does that mean in ninth grade and they have a very, very high English language proficiency or very low? To me, that makes a big difference. And
So what I was referring to is
talking
not-
generically,
Yeah.
everybody at grade 9 that hasn't completed, the English language learning.
Yeah.
And to me, it would make a big difference if somebody's 95% there or only 5% there,
Right.
whatever the number is, whatever that particular number is. And I can't say what that is. I'm not
Right.
really that familiar with it.
So I think I'm hearing two things. Alignment between the way we all talk about proficiency and what those levels, how they're described and how they're measured from K-12 through community college at the very least. And then the other part, you just said.
Well, yeah, particularly in college, in what a Writing 115 course, for example, would require.
Right.
You
So
know.
what it looks like in sort of plain language. So all of us understand when we're saying somebody is proficient, for
Yeah.
example.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Proficient
think I
enough to
finally
survive
got
in
it.
college courses.
If we ask this question, for a student to be successful in a Writing 115 course, what level,
Proficiency.
coming a proficiency out of ELO, does
What do
that
they need?
require?
And does that really match? With if it's the highest level, does that really match with what they want for Writing 115?
Is a 5 going to do
enter?
it?
Yeah, right.
Okay, I
Yeah.
finally got the question.
My other thing is I'm just not sure when you're talking about grade 3 or grade 9. To me, I'm looking at the level of English language proficiency that individual student has, not what their age is or
'Cause it depends on
No,
what-
we
what their
look at
grade
the
is, for
language
example.
proficiency
Yeah.
level. It's
Yeah.
just that we know, for example, if a kid was in the ELD program and their language proficiency level was a 1 when they came to us at kindergarten and they're still at a level 1 when they get through 4th grade,
That's
when
clear.
we have a problem.
Yeah, that's clear. I just haven't always seen that in the
Okay.
cohort data so clearly spelled out. I mean, that's clear. You said 6 months is the benchmark. Shouldn't go longer than
For
that at level 1.
It's
Yeah.
different for each level. And that's
Yeah.
the other thing we have to understand. Is that the same understanding in the college world as it is in the K-12 world?
Mhm.
So in the conversation with Brian, I kind of got the sense that he is going to run data that looks at how long at students' ELPA scores when they exit the program. He's going to look at graduation rates for students scoring a 4 and students scoring a 5. Are there other layers of that we need to ask him to run for us? That are going to answer your questions?
I think David and his department are going to help us more. I mean, we've asked some questions. But I think that as they start to put together this white paper that starts to say, we're finding some of these things, I'm not so interested in continuing to find more and more data if we can't answer the questions we
Okay.
already have.
Great.
If we've landed on the 2 key data points, for example, that really are going to inform doing something differently, we ought to stick on those.
Great.
In fact, I guess that was why I was thinking about this idea of a white paper, because I thought we keep asking Brian for all this information. And I've been on committees where we've asked Brian for information before. He does a lot of great work, but if it doesn't go anywhere, we don't do anything with it, then why are we having him do all that work?
Right.
Okay. All right, so moving on, we're still on the ELL conversation. We had TSPC share with us the dual language standards, which is really exciting. Again, I think that's another piece of work we ought to celebrate at OEIB. This was something that came originally from the collaborative. It was in the ELL plan. It actually is getting done. That's huge to move that quick in the state. We're in a new era. And then the next one under that was the ELL expectations for general education candidates. And I know that was my responsibility and David's. I think we were going to talk with Keith. I did touch base with Vicki, and I do know that the conversation isn't dead.
Right.
It wasn't totally tabled. They are moving forward with more conversation, but we don't have any more details about that. Although I did get invited to a meeting, I can't remember if you were on that email, to TSPC where they're going to discuss it again in March. So I'm just waiting for the exact time. They've asked me to come and testify for that.
I'll let you represent us there.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Yeah, my question is what time, because it was like all day.
I was
I don't
afraid
want
of
to
that.
sit there all day.
I was afraid of that. Yeah.
But I think the issue, from what I understand, and I just have a very little understanding of it, is that there wasn't, I don't think, a challenge to the fact that our teachers preparing in teacher preparation programs become proficient at meeting the needs of ELL kids. It was the next step of, if they are going to be proficient, shouldn't faculty then who are teaching them be proficient? And that was where they ran into a little challenge. And I don't think it was around, do they think it's a good idea? I think it was more around, how do we get that done? Because we don't have a mechanism for requiring faculty who are already done in teaching to go back and retool. And I don't know, I had a little question about that in the first place, because we probably ought to have a way to do that, but right now we don't. So I think that's where the conversation is. So I felt a little more hopeful when I talked to Vicki that it wasn't tabled because people gave pushback. That's what it sounded like at first. I don't think it's so much pushback. I think it was just they were already considering some other big things, and it was like, how are we going to get this one to happen? And now who's going to bear the cost? It wasn't that it wasn't a good idea.
And it isn't that you do it once. I mean, if you make the commitment to add another whole skill level to every faculty member who touches a candidate, you're talking about methods faculty, you're talking about university supervisors, and those folks change a lot. And so it's not a one-time catch people up on something and give them some training. You'd have to sustain that training. Who would be doing the training? How do you document that? I mean, I actually can speak to this because I actually went through this at a very large Research One institution in Florida. And it can be done. It's a major investment to say that all of your faculty who are in your prep program are, whether I'm a math person, a psychology faculty member, a university supervisor, teaching infotech, that I have gone through a preparation around the needs and explanations and understanding of ELL learners. It can be done. It's an extensive investment that would have to be really thought through well. And who's, do you just say, well, okay, David, you're the ELL faculty member at your university program, therefore you are in charge of preparing all your colleagues and keeping them up to date and making sure that you document that they went through professional development. So I think those are some of the, not the barriers, but things that would have to be resolved.
So the good news is the conversation is still alive and well. They're going to bring it back. It will probably be out there for a while. I think it's really great that we ask the difficult questions about sustainability and how it's really going to happen in the state, and don't just ignore it, because I know what happens in the state. We have a requirement and it doesn't actually go anywhere. So we don't really want just policy that says you have to do it if there isn't a way to actually make it happen. I'd rather keep the conversation alive. So that's where we are with that one. Anything else anyone thinks we need to clarify about any of the ELL work? We do know that we early on asked for David to come back with just kind of a report that identifies, I think, two things. One, state of the state in terms of what's going on with the picture of our ELL students, and then where are we in terms of the strategic plan, what's the current work being done, and I'm sure there's adjustments to the ELL plan that are going on.
Right now, I think that's going to happen at the April meeting. He confirmed that he'd be able to be here.
Okay, great. Okay, moving to 8.0, draft items of cooperating teachers survey. Remember when we heard that one of the barriers or challenges in teacher preparation programs is having enough cooperating teachers, and that there are some real challenges around the new evaluation system and teacher accountability for student outcomes, and sometimes that's just one of the barriers. So Hilda and others drafted questions, and
So I will
Wanna
say
catch
that
us
right
up?
now, this is a very limited N of 1 that drafted questions.
oh,
But as you can see at the top here, you're the first group that would have a chance to just look over briefly. I would also expect that this will go to staff at TSBC, the Oregon Education Association, and the Oregon Association of Teacher Educators, as well as the Chalkboard Distinguished Educators Council, which has indicated an interest in this particular work. So briefly, what I tried to do here, took Mark's suggestion, a drop-down menu for comprehensive demographics. So we'd look at gender, race, ethnicity. All of this would be obviously self-report and voluntary. Level of classroom teaching assignment, the discipline area that you are working in, how long you've taught, your last degree you've earned. We thought it was important to find out how many student teachers you've actually worked with. And we would use that as a way to disaggregate the data. You know, there's a difference between somebody who says, I've only had one in the last 10 years versus I've had 15 over the last 10 years. And also there could be interest in finding out how many times people are declining to supervise a cooperating teacher, and you'll see that that comes up later. And recency. So that's sort of the demographic data that would allow us to cross-tabulate the results from different levels. The first big question just looks at the one reason. Here's where I was kind of in a dilemma. I read the literature briefly around what work has been done, and there are a lot of things that are kind of out there that we could put on here, but I thought maybe we need to hone in on what's the main reason that people are accepting student teachers. The groups that look at this, including yourselves, might say you want this to be the top 3 reasons. It doesn't matter to me, I just didn't want people to be able to check everything that applied and then we learn nothing.
I like that.
Then that's followed by, if you decline to take a student teacher, what's the one reason that best described your reason for doing that? And again, as you read this, you might come back and tell me, I don't know what you mean by something you have bulleted here, or you forgot to add something. Then we're asking people if they've taken, this would be logic, skip logic on the survey. So if you've taken a student teacher, it would take you to this question about your level of satisfaction. These we thought perhaps, I used we. I thought, because it hasn't gone to anybody else yet. I sent it to one other faculty member who's done some research in this area, and she's taken a look at it. She hasn't gotten back to me yet. So the bullets here, I just thought probably they could quickly respond and rate their satisfaction level on a scale of 0 to 7 on each of these. How they were selected, how the person was assigned. Didn't somebody just come down and say, you're getting a student teacher one day? How you were prepared and trained for your role, the support you got prior to taking the student teacher, and then the support you got during the time you had the student teacher. And I threw in support that your school or district might provide. Because maybe the principal goes, you know what, I know you got a lot on your plate, maybe we find somebody else to pick up your load on bus duty or something. The level of the required responsibilities, I mean, was it doable? Did you feel like you understood what it was about, the clarity of information? How much time that it took to serve? The value and support that the assigned university supervisor added to this, and your compensation and incentives, and then an overall experience. Using a tip from some other surveys I'm familiar with, I just added in a separate question, how likely would you be to take another student teacher if offered? And their explanation. Question 6 may end up coming out of this, but this has been such a debate around how many weeks that somebody needs to be in a full-time student teaching. So I threw it in here. We'll see if it survives the review process of many different perspectives, but
I'd be really curious to find out from teachers what they think.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
I think it's a good one. So I hope it doesn't come out.
and then I took the roles listed here from the literature reviews that I read and just identified what typically a cooperating teacher should be doing. And I wanted to see whether or not this resonated with the expectations that Oregon cooperating teachers think they're doing. And I think this would be valuable in the sense that it would give you a sense of how big a lift this is. And if we're not compensating people or giving them enough time to do this work, and we ask them to do these things and they try to do these things, you can see why people might be turning down the opportunity. Question 8 really gets at just what kinds of things were used to prepare you for your role. So that's a quick check, any of the following. Whereas question 9 asks them more of a judgmental question about which of the 3 were most valuable to you. So that maybe this would result in a policy that said every educator prep program should be providing these 3 things minimally based on what the voices in the field are telling us. 10 is an open-ended item that asks them, what types of supports were useful to you in case we didn't capture something. And then 11 really gets into compensation, and 11 and 12 parallel each other, at least they should. Yes, they do. So 11 is they can check any of these that were in place when they took a student teacher. And if there were amounts, we ask them how much, whether it's credits or stipends. That's an easy fill-in. We listed other in case there's something we didn't think about. And then question 12 gives them that same list, but they just are going to show us which 3 are the most important to them. We know that a lot of universities use vouchers. And so we asked an open-ended question in number 13 about how easy was it to access and use those. We've heard from some folks that if a university provides you with a voucher and then says, but you can't use that during the summer, that really is a problem if that's when the teachers really have time to use those vouchers. How effective were those vouchers in meeting your professional needs? We know that sometimes the topics may not be available of what would really be important for me as a teacher. And then what changes would they make to the total, to strengthening and supporting the role, and then any other comments. I'm thinking that we'd have to give definitions, so I started laying out some definitions that would pertain to the survey so that people were all using the same language.
Very nice.
Well, it's
very good.
the
Very
problem
thorough.
is that my concern is that it might be too thorough. And
Well,
that
it is
might
long.
be too long.
So remind me about how we're
It's
going to
too
make
long.
sure
So-
that we get people to fill
So
this out.
here's the dilemma. I am aware that OEA has administered a survey recently around implementation of the Common Core State Standards. I'm aware that at the end of this month, the TEL survey launches, which is really critical. This is a survey that will give us for the very first time a real look at the conditions, the working conditions of our teachers. And we have full support from COSA, OEA, OSBA, OEIB, all of those O words, to launch this and do it well. So we do not want to bump into that. You heard Scott mention that people who took a student teacher are going to be receiving a survey. Well, no, that's employer, so that wouldn't be going to the cooperating teacher. But that's another survey that's going out. So my guess is we might not get around to even issuing this until perhaps April or May, and then May is really tough for classroom teachers.
So knowing that we
So-
also have all these surveys we're doing inside the district
Yep,
and high school accreditation surveys, and it's just unbelievable how many surveys we ask teachers to fill out. That's why I asked the question. So I don't think it's a bad thing to get the survey at a time when it's going to work best, to get the best input, even if it doesn't meet us getting the information right away. And I'm just wondering, way at the end of the year, I know people are trying to wrap up, but I don't think there's as many surveys at that point. I don't know when cooperating teachers are finishing up with their teachers.
It
I don't know
depends
if
on
there's
if
a way
it's a
to
private or
say
a
it
public.
depends.
So publics finish up usually the middle of June, or graduation is the middle of June, 12th, 13th in there. Privates finish much earlier, so they would be in May. I did think that we could work through the colleges to say, you all know who your cooperating teachers were this year. That would change this, though. You would only get people who took a cooperating teacher. You wouldn't get people who turned down a cooperating teacher. So that was the limitation there. I know that Teach Oregon is working with 5 partnerships that are all focused on things like clinical preparation, and they would be willing to administer it through their partnerships, but I think you only touch a fraction then of the total picture. And again, it might be, you'd only get those districts that happen to be near a university. Now, the truth is, those districts that are near a university are more likely to have taken student teachers.
Right.
OEA, I've been in conversation with them. They just really want to make sure we don't bump into another important instrument that would, you don't want to overwhelm people with, oh
Do you
my
think
God.
there's any
Survey
value in even
fatigue.
just waiting till fall when people come back
Certainly
energized
could,
and
certainly could.
that some of them might be considering being willing to take on, I mean, the energy level's in a different place for teachers for doing surveys, because this is a long one. I kept thinking, so how much time will it take them to read all of this, even though they don't have to click on every item?
Well, the other thing
But
is
the
that
questions
you
are all
all could
important.
look through it and say, it might be a good item, but let's not put it in, and you could reduce it that way. I can certainly run it through these other groups this spring, get their feedback, and come back and show you what they're recommending, and we could include in there what's the best time,
Yeah,
and how could we...
and process.
Right.
I would recommend doing that because I would like, and maybe starting with places where there's projects and then sort of contain the data. So if you start with Chalkboard or even the Distinguished Educators Group,
That
because
makes
they're already
sense.
working on projects, even though it's small, it might be representative.
My concern is you won't get people who've said no, so...
No, but to get started, because
Yeah.
some of the question was around incentive. I mean, that was when we were asking in terms of investment. What would be an incentive? It's not the only piece of information we wanted,
Right,
but
right.
we could get some early results. And then just,
I'm
the survey again
going to
later.
come back to the issue that I think only 6 educator prep programs are involved in Teach Oregon. So you'd really, out of 18 to 19 programs, I always say 18 to 19 because Willamette is closing down. So that would be my concern about using the Teach Oregon project as the,
that's the Chalkboard one.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I can certainly ask them about the questions, give them a chance to weigh in on that, get their advice on how we can engage a broad participation, the timing of it, and do the same with these other groups.
Well, I think they have a good history of getting people to participate in this kind of survey, so I certainly think it's a good group to ask.
But they wouldn't have names, that's my concern. They would not have names of teachers for, I mean, we'd have to go through either ODE or,
You mean to administer the survey?
right, it has to get out to teachers.
Well, it could go through COSA. COSA sends us surveys all the time. and then superintendent send them out. So we could lean on the superintendent group. At COSA,
That's
I'd be
interesting.
willing to
I haven't
take
leaned on
that.
them lately.
No.
So if we took it to them and asked them, I think they would think it's a good survey to take. They might have some opinion about when to do it, but I think you have a chance of getting it pushed out. I know we got encouraged very strongly to participate in TEL and how we might communicate about that. And we're a group that seems committed to trying to do things together, at least for now, so.
That's a good idea, because then you also would get the population who declined.
Right.
So we should probably talk to Craig first
Yep,
about it.
let's do that, and
Okay.
then, and I think you're right, there's probably no immediate need to do this right away.
I think it's important to do it right. It's a great survey. The questions are exactly what we need. You've taken all this time to look at the best practice and make sure that what you're putting in the survey is aligned with best practice. So now I think it bears taking time. Sometimes we think everything has to be done now. And we could do a better job if we just timed it
I'd be
better.
very mindful about it.
So you and I will follow up on that in one of our
Okay.
phone conversations, okay?
Okay. All right, anything else about that? Thank you for putting that together, because I know that's pretty much been generated by this group, and Hilda's done all the work.
Yes, thank you.
Very nice. All right, so the next thing on our agenda, before we just kind of review items for next time, is public testimony. Do we have public testimony today? We have one person. You do need to sign up, but we'll go ahead and start with you, and then you can sign Seth's form. Pardon me? Oh, a couple of reminders that I need to remind you with, and that is that one speaker from each group. I don't know if you're from different groups or the same group, and each speaker will get 3 minutes. So Seth, if you'll be our timekeeper, that would be great. If you'll state your name, and then you can sign the form when Seth.
I'm trying to decide if I should let her go.
Oh, okay. You both from the same group?
Yes. We're both parents,
Oh,
and we share the same concern. I think someone from my group has already testified here with you all, but Lynn Lyon from Decoding Dyslexia Oregon, last summer or maybe September, I have her testimony here. And I've been listening. Thank you so much for letting this be an open meeting. And I've really learned a lot, and all these acronyms are going around my head. And I heard you say grassroots, and I think that's what we're part of. I just want to say 3 words: explicit reading instruction. It will be the biggest game changer in Oregon. There already are evidence-based research out there. We need to connect it to every school. We are getting letters from around the state saying, "Help, we can't find a tutor." And it's not just the severe dyslexic kids. 60% of kids struggle learning to read. And I was one of them. My father never learned to read, so I'm very motivated to help. My son's doing great, but I'm motivated to spend the rest of my life making sure that access to literacy reaches everyone. And after I found the tutor for my son and method-based research kicked in, and immediately he started reading. Even after I had been exposing him to books since birth and talking to him constantly about books. We don't have TV in our house. Even then, even with kindergarten and 2 years of preschool, he would not see those symbols. And what do you know? Research is available. It's out there. I was so lucky to get it. It was just by chance for me. And I'm so grateful that my son won't have the same life I had, where to be functionally illiterate like my father. So I have to speak up and just say, when you write your white paper, can you please have a voice for us parents around Oregon who can't urge you enough to address early literacy. I appreciate seeing Serena here and hearing Scott Fletcher. We're going to give a presentation to the House of Education, the Oregon representatives in the House of Education this month. And it's a national movement. 45 states are now having decoding dyslexia chapters of groups of parents that are working hard to get dyslexia acknowledged and addressed in our schools. I love the article in the paper last weekend, but I still don't hear the words explicit reading instruction, and it's available. And when I came home to my neighborhood, I live in an affluent neighborhood, and I said to my elder neighbors who are in their 60s, my gosh, my son, I didn't know it, he has dyslexia. I knew my dad had it, but I always thought it was word reversal, and now I learned it's just struggles with reading. So I said to my neighbors, he's going to see a tutor. He has this great tutor, and it's called Orton Gillingham, and they said, oh yeah, our son had that. Oh yeah, our son had that. And then I met someone else over there in Dunthorpe. Oh yeah, our son had that. And I'm just like, well, that's not fair. That's not fair that people with money and resources can hire private tutors and get help. And then there's this large group of kids like me growing up that I didn't even know I had it. Even knowing that my father did and he told me he did, I didn't know what it meant. And I thought I just didn't practice reading enough. And so I really urge you to make an exception and hear her story, because it's exceptional, her story. We just heard it recently. And there are hundreds of families writing us with stories just like hers.
So I do think we have enough time, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, my name's Tiff Mumal. I have a father who has dyslexia, a brother who had dyslexia, he's passed, and then a daughter with dyslexia. I think it's worth noting that my other daughter is a tag reader, and both my husband and I are college educated and are both proficient and prolific readers. We had in kindergarten and first grade probably the most excruciating experience that parents can have when they're learning that their child is falling behind and not being able to get the answer. Why is my child not succeeding in the classroom? Why is my child struggling here? And I was told repeatedly, you need to try harder, she needs to practice more, you need to provide more opportunities for reading, which to us just seemed somewhat absurd given the love of books that we have in our family. So I spent 5 months at the end of her first grade experience reading with her for an hour every single night. And it was very difficult. And after a couple of months went by, I realized that my daughter had some very specific patterns in her errors. And after another month or two, I began to research these patterns of errors and found that this could be indicative of dyslexia. I had no idea at that point that it was a hereditary condition, or I might have jumped to that conclusion somewhat earlier, but I didn't. And then I had her pre-screened and then eventually professionally screened for dyslexia, because that service is not available through school districts. All that we could tell was whether or not she had a quote-unquote learning disability, and it would not result in her having any specific type of instruction that would address the dyslexia. So we did have her professionally evaluated outside of the school district, and after discussing with our school principal what to do about that once we had a diagnosis, we learned very quickly that there wasn't anything to do that that the school could provide for us, but rather we needed to provide those services ourselves. There's so much more to my story, but I'd like to speak more specifically to what I've been hearing here tonight or today in your meeting, which has been incredibly informative. And my brain is a little bit boggled by the scope of what you are tasked with. I mean, it's pretty incredible, frankly. And so I applaud you for being willing to take on such a gigantic task, I mean, and so multifaceted. I do want to urge you in regard to the early learning. I heard Mark was talking about when he was with us on the conference call about best practices for transitioning kids out of third grade and into the fourth, fifth, sixth area. And of course, he had a focus on also all-day kindergarten and what that program might look like. And I would like to suggest that part of that all-day kindergarten and into third grade would include identification of students with dyslexia. It does not require the extremely expensive full-spectrum psychological evaluation. It doesn't actually require all that to determine, firstly, who's at risk, which teachers can do if they're properly instructed on how to identify at-risk students. And then what to do with that information. And my suggestion would be implement testing for at-risk students, a basic testing that would identify some of the basic indicators of dyslexia, and then move toward knowing what that looks like on a statewide level. How can we ask teachers to be accountable for their student results if, in fact, the teachers aren't able to identify what the immediate needs are of a lot of these kids that are having literacy issues. And
So we're at the 3 minutes, but go
Oh,
ahead
I'm
and finish
sorry.
up your thoughts.
I just wanted to say, that's basically what I wanted to say. I would like it if, I mean, we cannot blame this issue on teachers. We can look at teacher education, but we also have to look at identification, because there is a significant misconception that dyslexia only affects a small percentage of our population around the world, but really it is a 15 to 20% of our population that struggles with these. If we can identify, and then we can learn how we can address, and there's a lot of information out there about that.
So typically this isn't a conversation, it's just testimony, but I will say that I'm with you on the explicit instruction, phonics instruction. I've been the whole route as a teacher and administrator. I would invite you to take a look at the state literacy framework if you haven't already seen that. I was a part of that work, and I know Nancy Golden was on that committee. And I think the unfortunate thing is there is a good piece of work that speaks very explicitly to explicit instruction in phonics. Also, the assessments that need to be there, both the benchmarking and the progress monitoring, as well as phonics screening, I believe is identified in there. And you're right, it doesn't need to be specialist, it just needs to be part of the package. Many of us have been crying out for that, as well as core programs in the state for a really long time. And unfortunately, like other states where the money that comes through the state is allocated specifically for textbooks and for scientifically based programs, in our state it goes into the whole pot and it's left to districts to decide how to do that. And so what's happened, I've been in 5 of those districts where for 14 to 20 years we've done no adoption because it was teachers or textbook adoption, although, so you can look at the newspapers, we did an adoption in my district. But I think it's important for you to know there's a lot of people in your camp that are educators, and we have a framework in the state that identifies all that. And I do think there is an effort in ODE to pull that out and start to make that part of this literacy work. And I would encourage you to help Serena with the literacy campaign, because I think most of us who are looking at best practice would all agree with you that that needs to be there front and center. And it was in our framework. I think it just needs to be resurrected and pushed forward. So thank you for coming, for taking all the time. Appreciate that. Good luck in your efforts. We need all of you. And I will invite you to continue to help us know how to engage parents more and more in all of these conversations, because I know we all have an interest in that. Sometimes it's difficult for us to know in our very formal structures how we can do that in a very meaningful way, where we really get all the voices. So please continue to let us know. And I know our equity subcommittee is very interested in getting at that piece. So maybe you take a peek.
I think that was actually where the testimony was previously. It was in the equity partnership.
So thank you. So if there is, I guess I'll just review our task for next time before I move on. So I'll call an end to the public testimony. So our task for next time, first of all, I'll let you know our meeting is aligned with the OEIB meeting once again. It's on March 11th, 10:30 to 12:30. It's at PCC Rock Creek Event Center. So for those of us who live out in that direction, I'll be a little closer.
That's different than what
It's
might
not
be
the
on
Meyer
your
Memorial.
printed. Right. That's where you are right now. That
Right.
change just got made, so make
So
sure.
March is at PCC Rock Creek.
Right, and that is where the OEIB meeting is. So we'll
We
be.
don't
That's
have a room
helpful.
yet, but Seth will give
It's
that
the
to you.
event center, there's 3 large conference rooms and we have.
Great.
Oh.
So I think we should also clarify, because I know, Seth, you've been getting us lunch when our meetings run back to back. So if you are not intending to do that, because some of us were ready to call for a pizza. It was a long day.
Yeah.
So do you want to do that, or you want us to plan to bring our own?
I will check to see if I can do that.
So if you can't, I think that's fine. You just need to let the committee know that there's no food or drink. Okay. Then what we have already is update and recommendations from Early Learning Division. We have more coming to them, and I'm assuming these are the recommendations after they've looked at the data
That's
from the
correct.
KRA. Okay, and then the COSA work groups that I mentioned, I don't think I mentioned all day kindergarten, but I did mention the 11 to 14 transitions. They have a set of recommendations, and we are asking them to use this framework that Hilda's put together for us, to have them come report to us so we can practice having the conversation around those specific questions. And then they have some very specific recommendations around all-day kindergarten. Hilda, you're going to connect with
Mary Alice.
About that. I mentioned it to her, but I did not follow up with an
Yep.
email yet. And I know Hilda and I will review our notes from today to see what else we bring to you in March. That time always goes fast when we have to be right before the OEIB meeting. So we, seemed like didn't we add time to this meeting? Yeah,
Yes,
we
we
added
did.
a half hour, so
That's why you
It's
went
good.
crushed.
yeah, and I think that worked well. So when we can do that.
And
we
we're
will
going to
do it.
invite Mark Lasher to the next meeting if he can make it, around rural issues.
Right.
Plan a panel around everything that we're learning about teacher preparation for OEIB, hopefully at the April meeting.
So would we have the panel come here first as practice,
think
or would
so.
go straight there? That's fine.
I think we could work with them to
Either.
define it, but a lot of it pieces that you've already heard.
Okay.
And we're going to connect Serena up with the ELL strategic plan. That's a due later. Okay?
Okay. Anything else from the committee?
Oh, I have changes to make on the questions and the recommendation form. And also to think about the cooperating teacher survey being later and running it by some other groups.
And more concise if possible.
Yes.
All right. It is 11:30. No, 29. Well,
12:30.
I mean 12:30. 29. Oh, I can't tell time. So I adjourn us for today.
Thanks.